Chapter 27. Why asthma patients die and how their doctors are punished if they suddenly stop dying. Buteyko was well aware of the growing rumbles of distant thunder, all the while the discovery of the diseases of deep breathing was becoming more widespread. It wasn't so much a conscious awareness, more a vague, uneasy feeling. On the surface, everything appeared to be going really well. Natalia had brought back such a glowing report of her clinical trial that for 3 days the whole laboratory were doing handstands. The long-awaited document not only recognized the effectiveness of the method in treating asthma, mention was also made of its innovative role in alleviating a whole host of other conditions in many patients. Before Natalia's trip to Leningrad, this had been something Dr Buteyko could only dream of. In a nutshell, Natalia had made amazing strides in raising the profile and enhancing the prestige of the discovery of the diseases of deep breathing. Given her working conditions in Leningrad in the winter of 1965, it was more than anyone could ever have been expected to achieve. There was no doubt about it. On the face of it, you might think they could afford to relax a little. They had achieved success, substantial documented success, with all the stamps and signatures of the Leningrad clinicians to prove it. However, over the years, Buteyko had received too many blows below the belt from all sides to be able to believe in real success. He in no way wished to belittle Natalia's achievement, far from it. He realized how wise his choice had been in the face of such a decisive test. Yet a sober analysis of the facts of the matter revealed the other side of the coin. His young, daredevil colleagues did not pay much attention to this, but he, once bitten, twice shy, could not turn a blind eye to what was happening in this dog-eat-dog world of academia. For one thing, the magnificent, that was the only word for it, document Natalia had brought back with her on the results of the preliminary trial of the method lacked the most important signature, that of Professor Chugunov. Secondly, despite the fact that it was so thoroughly positive in every respect, his local enemies had started to intensify their hostile activities since it achieved the document. This told him, far more clearly than words could have done, how the self-sacrificing work of Natalia Voronova in Leningrad was viewed by the local medical top brass there. They had made their views known to the medical elite here in Siberia. It was obvious that Chugunov had met with General Sharatsky in Leningrad, and that a dispatch with very different contents had also been sent to Novosibirsk, parallel to the trial report. Buteyko felt this particularly acutely when one day, just a few months after Natalia Voronova had returned from Leningrad, one of his staunchest followers burst into his office in floods of tears. The tall, attractive Lydia Nezorova was barely recognizable. The fire which usually burned in her bright eyes was extinguished. Her round, rosy cheeks were streaked with tears. "Whatever's happened?" Buteyko hurried over to her. "What's wrong? Who's upset you?" "Martinov," was all Dr. Nevzorova managed to get out between sobs, not removing her orange handkerchief from her eyes. "He's persecuting me with his investigative commission. He's making life impossible." As she uttered these words, her shoulders shuddered convulsively, and she sank down into the chair Buteyko had pulled out for her. It looked as though there had definitely been a message or phone call from Leningrad. What Lydia Nevzorova went on to tell Buteyko, once she had calmed down a little, certainly pointed very clearly in that direction. Vyacheslav Martinov was someone Dr. Buteyko had turned to for help in the past, having convinced himself of the pointlessness of trying to find any sort of common language with Permekin. This was back before Buteyko had completed his Ph.D. On that icy January day in 1962, he had gone to see Martinov, a senior lecturer at Novosibirsk Medical Institute, because positive and thoroughly complimentary rumours about him abounded. He was truly a rising star in the institute firmament. He was still quite young, too. Buteyko and Martinov were almost the same age. And he was so progressive. He wasn't afraid to give unbiased lectures to the students in the department, absolutely refuting the status quo. He fought so hard for the interests of the students and risked entering into dangerous disputes with the authorities on their behalf. And most importantly, he was completely devoted to science, day and night. He was always searching for something new, always seeking to get to the heart of the matter, working tirelessly. Perhaps this was just the person to help him, Buteyko had thought, naively, scrutinizing the pink-cheeked Martynov with his neat beard when he went to meet him in the small auditorium, which was still emptying after the end of one of his classes. They didn't go to the department, there might be other academics there, and Buteyko wanted to talk to this rising star one-to-one. "I've heard excellent reports about you, and so decided to come for a chat," Buteyko said, flattering the senior lecturer. "And I'm very pleased to see a diagnostician who's so well known in our circles," said Martynov, quick to return the compliment as he stroked his jet-black beard with slender fingers. Without hesitation, Dr Buteyko recounted the tale of his discovery of the diseases of deep breathing. He explained the basic idea of his method, adding some thoughts about its potential importance in the areas of general medicine which were of particular concern to Martynov. "I believe you're currently primarily engaged in combating rheumatism. Rheumatic conditions respond well to treatment with our method," Buteyko had said, casting his hook a little deeper. "What? Hold on a moment. What are you thinking of?" "Absolutely not." Martynov was not willing to swallow the bait. His rather small, bulging eyes widened unnaturally. "What on earth are you talking about? What's all this stuff about breathing? Excuse me, but we're up to our eyes in problems. You've got to understand that the issue of rheumatism is a global one. Our best scientific resources are dedicated to solving it. In fact, we're literally on the brink of solving this great challenge." "But the thing is, breathing less deeply will help you to solve it," Buteyko interjected. "Dr Buteyko," Martynov grimaced, as though he had toothache, "I don't know how your method works on asthma sufferers, but to suggest using it for rheumatism is, in my opinion, quite ridiculous. We've got heparin. Now that's another story. We can definitely overcome the rheumatism with a medical product like that. Well, and not just rheumatism. Heparin could beat lots of other diseases. Just give us time." Martynov had written his thesis on heparin and quite simply idolized the substance that so fascinated him. He was prepared to treat virtually anything with it. Buteyko, himself someone who tended to get very enthusiastic about things, began to realize that he wouldn't be getting any help from this heparin fanatic. As a scientist, Dr Buteyko was disinclined to overestimate the significance of heparin, unlike Martynov. Yes, it helped to thin the blood, that was well known. But no one except Buteyko knew that heparin also contributed to a slight reduction in the depth of the patient's breathing. That was the reason behind its suitability for administration in so many different circumstances. However, it could never hope to replace the volitional elimination of deep breathing. The VEDB was 100 times more effective and had no harmful side effects, whereas heparin, like any medication, had an impact on the body that was far from neutral. However, Martynov believed in heparin alone. He saw it as a true panacea. So it was all the more insulting to Buteyko when, after a time, Martynov began to reproach him publicly for saying that the method was a panacea. "There's no such thing," Martynov declared, conveniently forgetting his own glorification of the panacea heparin. On that occasion, in January 1962, Buteyko came away from Martynov with nothing. All he was left with was the bitter aftertaste of yet another unsuccessful attempt to gain at least one supporter in local medical circles who genuinely believed in his discovery. It never entered Buteyko's head, however, that the heparin fanatic would soon become a second Professor Pomekin for him. Martynov quickly scaled the career ladder. Following his PhD, he went on to do a postdoctorate. He soon occupied a key position at the Medical Institute, and when the joint signal of wrath came from Leningrad, from Professor Chuganov and General Sharatsky about Dr Buteyko's irresponsible activities, this Pomekin Mark II began to take energetic steps towards stopping them, encouraged by the original Pomekin. Martynov, incidentally, had not ended up curing rheumatism and other conditions with the aid of heparin. He was aware that Dr Buteyko was practically invulnerable as a scientist, and that he had a rigorous, transparent and verified theory backed up by irrefutable laboratory research, and so he decided to attack Buteyko on a weaker flank. One of his first victims was the general practitioner from Berdsk, Lydia Nezvorova. Cheerful, brown-haired Lydia, who had graduated from the Medical Institute in 1960, had had plenty of opportunity to hear the impassioned, subversive lectures given by Martynov back in her student days. "In science, you cannot take the roundabout route. If you are convinced that you're right, you cannot simply nod obediently, not even in the face of national luminaries. Our lives are so short. We must use them to do something significant. We must help those on whose behalf we take the Hippocratic Oath. We must help them, perhaps at the cost of our own material well-being and careers. And if necessary, we must also be prepared to pay a far higher price." These words of Vyacheslav Martynov, lionized by the student community for his courageous ideas, had set her heart aflame. She desperately wanted to be even just a bit like him. Brimming with the revolutionary ideas of the young idol of the Institute, she decided she should shoulder a heavier burden herself. At the time, she could see no heavier burden in medicine than seeking a cure for asthma, with the exception, of course, of cancer and such like. She had frequently seen the complete powerlessness of doctors endeavouring to relieve a patient from severe continuing asthma attacks. Lydia swore to herself that she would devote all her energies to combating this debilitating condition. In her final years of study, she combed all the relevant medical literature and went to dozens of extra seminars to find out more about all the latest innovations and discoveries in this area. She also repeatedly consulted the Institute's well-known scientists in the field. When Lydia found herself assigned to become a GP based at Berdsk Hospital, she decided that she was now sufficiently prepared to fulfill her vow. Asthmatics were thick on the ground on her patch, each one more gravely ill than the last. The young doctor rolled up her sleeves. Theophedrinum, breathing exercises. Lydia Nevzorova allowed neither herself nor her patients any rest. This intensive treatment of unfortunate asthmatics was at the time universally sanctioned, and so she was all the more horrified when the result was that one by one they all began to die, as if in response to a command. Admittedly, they didn't all die at once. Lydia Nevzorova would hardly have held on to a post if they had. However, from the time she arrived, mortality among the bronchial asthma patients showed a clear rise. This fact didn't create any particular problems professionally. These patients had long been considered incurable, and it wasn't unusual for them to die. All her actions were in strict accordance with the official guidelines for the treatment of such patients. Moreover, the energy and effort Nevzorova invested in her work was so obvious that it was impossible to find fault with her. Of course, fault can always be found with something, especially in the event of fatal outcomes. Nonetheless, the attitude of the kindly, thoroughly decent head doctor was one of sincere maternal concern. "You're just unlucky, Lydia. That's all there is to it," she stressed to the completely distraught Dr. Nevzorova. "Other GPs have the same problem, and these are seriously ill asthma patients. To be honest, no one has ever yet managed to truly cure them. Unfortunately, my dear, some things are simply beyond our power. Our only hope is science." The head doctor sighed in sympathy with her woe-begone colleague. But the absence of any disciplinary measures against her didn't make Lydia's life any easier. At night she began to dream of her dying patients. Worse still, the surviving asthma patients started to fear her. After going to the funeral of a fellow sufferer, some of Lydia's frightened patients pleaded with her not to come to their homes anymore. It was not uncommon for her to knock on the gate of a house to be greeted by the loud, frenzied barking of an unchained dog. A rumour spread among the asthma patients that the appearance of the young doctor would bring misfortune, and as she frequently called on her patients on her own initiative, she started to find that doors were slammed in her face when she appeared. On the day when the wife of one of her most seriously ill patients informed her in a distinctly unfriendly manner on the doorstep, not even inviting her into the flat, that her husband was not at home and she didn't know when he'd be back, Lydia decided to give up medicine. She had seen the light on in the patient's room, and behind the closed blinds she had been able to make out the silhouette of a man. With difficulty, she forced her leaden feet to take her back to the clinic. On automatic pilot, she set about seeing the queue of patients waiting outside her door for their consultation, through habit rather than on the basis of any rational decision. Almost none of them were asthma patients, for they'd recently taken to phoning for an ambulance if they needed attention. Lydia Nevzorova listened to the patients, took their blood pressure, and made notes in their records, yet all the while her mind was crowded with desperate thoughts. Where should she go? What should she do? She'd failed to keep the oath she'd sworn to herself. She was clearly a very long way from becoming a doctor like Martinov. The most important thing is not to give up. Keep going towards the goal you've set yourself, regardless of the obstacles you may encounter, she recalled him saying. But she couldn't do it. It turned out that not everyone was cut out to be like Vyacheslav Martinov. There was just no place for her among the white coats. Lydia handed the prescription she had just written to the 5th patient and asked him to send in the next one. Into her office came an elderly man with a slight limp, looking rather ill at ease. He was dressed in a baggy dark blue suit, which looked as though it had been made for him to grow into. Lydia Nevzorova started in surprise. "Mr. Vostrikov, what brings you here, and where on earth have you been?" Zakhar Vostrikov was one of her extremely ill patients. There were times when he had to call an ambulance several times a day in order to cope with the asthma attacks, which threatened to kill him. When she had first started in her job, Lydia had also called on him regularly, but recently he appeared to have vanished. After she was met several times at his gate by an angry dog, she had rather lost sight of him. Then, the fact that his emergency calls had stopped led her to the sad conclusion that he'd joined the ranks of the deceased. Sit down, Lydia quickly pulled out a chair for Vostrikov. She knew it was hard for him to stand for long. He looked as though he'd come back from the dead, she thought, as she noted her patient's inexplicable weight loss. Vostrikov had suffered from obesity. I'm fine. With a smile, Zakhar Vostrikov remained standing and rested one hand on the back of the chair proffered to him. I'm almost well, Dr. Nevzorova, he said straight away, without preamble, proudly straightening his shoulders. How? What do you mean? Lydia had almost lost her tongue. Here was a patient everyone had presumed dead announcing his resurrection. And there's nothing wrong with you? No, nothing to speak of, Zakhar Vostrikov replied, smiling even more mysteriously. I was cured of asthma by Dr Buteyko. Who? Lydia half rose from her chair. Dr Buteyko, from Akademgorodok, Vostrikov repeated more distinctly. He has a special asthma laboratory. People come to him from all over the world. Seizing her coat from its hook, Lydia dashed headlong for the door. Ladies and gentlemen, the consultation's ended for today, she practically shouted at the few remaining patients who sat on the leather couch by the window in the corridor. Don't wait for me. As luck would have it, an ambulance with a driver with whom she was on good terms appeared. In half an hour, Lydia had negotiated the crowd of visitors clustering around the entrance to the mysterious laboratory and literally burst into Dr Buteyko's office. Where's this Dr Buteyko? Show him to me. Dr Buteyko was taken aback at the sight of the attractive brunette, her black eyes burning like coals in her agitation. But the white coat he could see under her open winter coat gave him a clue as to what was going on. I'm Dr Buteyko. He broke off his conversation with a rather polished-looking, neatly coiffed man. I expect you're here about the asthma treatment. He looked the striking stranger up and down once more. Lydia nodded briskly in reply. I'll just finish my conversation with Professor Damin. Dr Buteyko half turned back towards this imposing gentleman. "In the meantime, you can chat with some of the patients in the corridor." "Are you a patient?" Lydia Nevzorova caught at the sleeve of a frail-looking elderly man nearest to the door to the laboratory. "Soon to be ex-patient," the man said, disengaging his arm. "I was mortally ill. I had asthma, chronic rhinitis, and dozens of other problems." "How did you come to be cured?" Lydia asked with distrust. She could see none of the signs of severe bronchial asthma in the man. "Well, I just didn't breathe so much." The old man cast a sidelong glance at the packed doorway of the Buteyko establishment. "Are you having me on?" Lydia exclaimed in a loud and rather hostile voice. But the second and third patients she spoke to assured her that the man wasn't lying. Thus began Lydia Nevzorova's acquaintance with Buteyko. For a long time, in the evenings after work, she went to Akademgordok. At the time, of the 20,000 local doctors, she was virtually the only qualified physician who had any desire to thoroughly master the volitional elimination of deep breathing. It was not long before the results of her efforts became known. In a very short space of time, Lydia had saved 200 inpatient beds and 900 days of disability pay in her district alone by taking Buteyko's discovery and using it in her practice. The diseases of deep breathing took flight before this able student of the extraordinary Dr Buteyko. But why was it the asthma patients in my district specifically who started dying one after another before I knew about your discovery? Lydia asked Buteyko one day. "Well, because you started such intensive treatment. Thing is, before modern treatments were developed for the fight against asthma patients suffered, but they didn't die. Then, once theophedrinum and other drugs came along, where was there for the poor patient to turn? There was nowhere in this world. The reason is that theophedrinum does not eliminate the disease, but it does do great harm to the body. And then there were those breathing exercises. 'Breathe more deeply, mimicked Buteyko, and raised his arms above his head. That's why a negligent doctor may have a lower death rate among their asthma patients. A doctor like that does not zealously carry out all the Ministry of Health's directives. But you started to work in earnest with the patients. That's why they stopped letting you into their homes." This speech sent a shiver up Lydia's spine. It meant that all those colleagues of hers were not curing patients, but were just contributing to the over-fulfillment of the funeral parlour's productivity plans. It was an incredible and preposterous image. After that, she was able to think about herself with a certain amount of pride. The inflammatory urgings of their idol Martinov were finally justified, not to take the well-trodden path in medicine, not to bow down before the universally accepted authorities. For example, Buteyko didn't care a fig about the regional health authority, even though it persecuted him day and night. And she was not afraid to apply his method openly, despite the fact that the local high priests of the medical establishment spread slanderous lies about the man who discovered the diseases of deep breathing. Only Professor Pomekin presented any real threat. From the most elevated lecterns he proclaimed Buteyko to be a dabbler and a charlatan. As a result, ordinary doctors were too intimidated to familiarize themselves with the method, believing it would come to no good. So, Lydia was all the more pleased to realize that she was not browbeaten by circumstances. She found herself in that longed-for, daring young generation of medical professionals about whom Vyacheslav Martinov had waxed lyrical in his fiery lectures. Lydia no longer contemplated abandoning her work. On the contrary, her accomplishments with the asthma patients in Berdsk meant she was soon promoted to the hospital itself. There she successfully continued her work, getting even the seemingly most hopeless cases back on their feet, and so freeing up large numbers of scarce beds. Then, suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, there appeared an investigative commission authorized by the powers that be to investigate, in the words of its head, her all but criminal, unconventional medical activities. But the worst thing was that the commission had been set up and directed to investigate her by none other than that most legendary idol of her student days, Vyacheslav Martinov. This fact alone was enough to send her out of her mind. Over the last few years, the former lecturer had carved out a meteoric career for himself. Having successfully completed his postdoctoral thesis, the fiery lecturer became one of the top candidates for the senior management of a subdivision of the Siberian branch of the Academy of Medical Sciences that was soon to be established. Of all things, one of the first actions he took in this new, potentially career-defining administrative role in the arena of academic medicine was to set up this Medical Investigative Commission. The commission was tasked with nipping in the bud even the most tentative propagation of what was perhaps one of the greatest discoveries in the history of medicine. Instead of examining all Lydia's patients who'd been cured with the Buteyko method, Martinov's commission took quite a different approach. The president of the commission interrogated her, there was really no other word for it, about patients in her care who had died, quizzing her closely on when and under what circumstances the deaths had taken place. Since almost none of the patients under Lydia's care in hospital had died, they started to dig deeper, touching on the early period of her work as a general practitioner. People were afraid of you, the head of the investigative commission pressed her. And your notes? He goggled at her with his unpleasant, deep-set eyes. How do you keep your notes? Where do you record the theophedrinum? Where are the notes about the breathing exercises? What are these incomprehensible diary notes, pulse by the hour, control pauses? Do you have authorization from the Ministry of Health for this? There is no authorization from the Ministry of Health for the Buteyko method, but of course there is authorization for the application of theophedrinum and breathing exercises in the treatment of asthma. Perhaps you'd like to ask the relatives of the patients who died how exactly their loved ones were helped by these treatments that are so widely tried and tested. Tired and losing faith in any kind of justice, Lydia attempted to parry the blows of the head of the commission. Another question. Did you actually treat them with theophedrinum back then? The president's expression was loathsome. Of course it's quite possible to write one thing in a patient's notes while in actual fact preaching any charlatan's theories. How dare you say such a thing? Dr. Nevzorova's head shot up defiantly, but then, remembering who'd sent the commission, she lowered it again. During the time the commission was carrying out its investigation, Lydia Nevzorova heard plenty of talk about Martinov. Mainly it was behind-the-scenes gossip by those outraged by the actions of the president of the commission towards one of the best doctors at her level in the hospital. I heard it myself, cross my heart, a senior nurse told her friend in a secluded spot near the canteen as she recounted how Lydia's former hero had scaled the career ladder. Lydia had by chance sat down for a brief rest not far from where the conversation was taking place. The nurses didn't spot her because she was concealed behind a large potted cactus standing on a low wooden table. My older brother is a head doctor in Novosibirsk. He hangs around with the bosses there and sees and hears loads of things, she explained heatedly to her friend, who had seemed sceptical about where she had her information from. That Martinov, once he'd finished his postdoctorate, he became sort of possessed. He started to make money wherever he could. My brother said that even his close friends were shocked at his greed. A professor's salary wasn't enough for him. The money he got for scientific research wasn't enough. He embezzled 15,000 rubles that was meant for clothing for psychiatric patients. Really letting rip, the nurse raised her voice. His record said that the money had been spent on some kind of scientific work, but actually he'd got hold of a mink coat for his wife and a whole load of other fine clothes. It's outrageous. Were the psychiatric patients meant to go naked and barefoot, or what? The case ended up going to the police. The anti-fraud people opened a file on Martinov, but he wised up in time and paid 10,000 back. He used some contact or other. Basically, he got away with it in the end, but not without a scandal. And the investigating authorities never detected any embezzlement? The infuriated nurse lowered her voice slightly. That's something else, Valia. It's nothing compared with what's to come. My brother says that as soon as the bosses at the Ministry of Health heard about Martinov's pilfering, they immediately fast-tracked him into the academy and promoted him. You mean they reward you for a thing like that? The other nurse said in astonishment. Valia, were you born yesterday? Her friend upbraided her. That's the way things are here. Every boss is a thief. They don't appoint honest people. Who needs them? At the Ministry of Health, they saw a professor embezzling and thought, aha, one of ours. Let's promote him into the high ranks. He's reliable. He won't let down his own. You don't pull your punches, do you? Tell it like it is, gasped Valia. If you don't believe me, look at what Martinov's commission is up to. You can't see Dr. Nevzorova's face anymore. They've pushed it so hard into the ground. And she's the one who's practically bringing patients back from the dead with this new method. Who, apart from a swindler, would want to destroy a person like that? And my brother said quite openly that the president of the commission is Martinov's butcher. He sends him wherever there's someone to be done away with, and he's bloody good at it. Lydia Nevzorova didn't believe everything she'd heard, but she became even more despondent. The commission completed its work by reprimanding her and giving her a formal warning, which she immediately hastened to impart to Buteyko. So, summing up everything that had happened in the year following the preliminary trial in Leningrad, what Buteyko was feeling was far from a soothing euphoria. The secret war against his discovery had evidently not abated for a moment, and the blow they struck him at the personnel department of the Siberian branch of the Academy of Sciences in the summer of 1966 demonstrated once and for all that his enemies were already openly going for bust.